Singularity.
Oh gosh. I tend to use big words. I'm a theoretical neuroscientist. I'm an AI researcher. It can be very hard to translate. So I'm going to try and go easy on the translators for those of you here that are using them. But to give a sense of background about me, I began life, as I said, as a neuroscientist. And about 12 years ago, as with most people that live in the San Francisco Bay Area, I got the entrepreneurial bug and had to start a startup. I mean, you just have to. You can't live in San Francisco and not start a startup. And apparently I've gotten a little too into it, because I have about 7 companies now, and the 3 books and a couple of kids, and it keeps me very busy. But to me, it's all the same sort of thing, which is just a heads up to whoever might have a clicker for me. If you could bring it out on stage, that would be great. So to me, what's really interesting about the potential of artificial intelligence isn't what you might be here, which is its ability to accelerate productivity, thank you, or to advance some specific business interest you have. It can, and I'd be happy to talk about that during the panel. I'm motivated in a very different way. I want to know, literally, how can we build better people? That's why I went and studied neuroscience in the first place. I was interested in something called neuroprosthetics, particularly cognitive neuroprosthetics. Essentially, I want to build cyborgs. I want to literally build better people. I want to jam things in your brain and make you smarter. And if you're curious, by the way, I think the research shows unequivocally that we can do this, that in 20 to 30 years, it will fundamentally change the definition of what it means to be human. That's my personal singularity. And if we were to do it right now for everyone in the audience, you would, in fact, be smarter, or at least the 1% of you that survived the surgery. You can make the choice yourself. But I think we need to start with an understanding about technology and artificial intelligence, that it isn't magic. This is something that I do somewhat disagree with Ray Kurzweil about. It doesn't magically make the world better simply because we have more technology. It's neither a problem nor the solution. It's just a tool. It's an amazing tool. It's a tool that is changing the world and will continue to at an accelerating pace. But in the end, all of the problems we're interested in solving are human problems and require human solutions. We can only leverage the capability of the tool. As soon as we rely on the AI to actually solve the problem, we will fail. And we see this happen again and again. And the results can be truly dismal. I was asked a little while ago to write a piece about how artificial intelligence will affect the economy and the future of work. And I started writing this. It had all the points that I wanted to make, but it didn't have the heart. So I rewrote it as a short story. The short story of a young man on his last day on the job because he had been replaced by an artificial intelligence. And this isn't a warehouse worker. This isn't a farm worker. He was a financial analyst. And I'll skip the technical details of how an AI would do that job. It's simply to say, there is no point in the economic ladder around the world, including here in Japan, which will not be subject to massive disruption in the workforce by artificial intelligence. And given that, I say this very intentionally provocative thing. Human capital is a toxic asset. 20 years from now, I have no idea what each of you or I will be worth in the productivity of the world. But I guarantee you, the way we are building people today, the way we are educating them, the way we have set up our workforce, human beings will be worth much less than we think they are. And it doesn't have to be that way. So I probably have about 8 to 10 hours worth of talk to give, and I don't have that time to talk to you. So I'm going to tell just a handful of stories about my personal work in the domain of artificial intelligence, or in fact, what I like to call augmented intelligence, the way the best of machine learning can enhance the best of humanity. And in the end, perhaps we can come back to this idea of human capital as a toxic asset and diagnose a way that we can actually create human value by combining it with machine learning. So let's start with this story. What you're looking at here is what we now might call a deep neural network. This was actually built about 10 years ago, so it sort of predated that language. But deep neural networks are the principal domain of artificial intelligence today. We might have an interesting debate about whether it is the best model going forward, but it is the principal model used today. So the degree to which your pictures get labeled on your favorite social media site, the ability of your phone to understand what you're saying in natural speech are functions of advances in deep neural networks. In this case, this is a network based on work I did long ago as an undergraduate doing real-time lie detection for the CIA. So we just were given raw video of people talking, and we had to tell them whether they were lying or not. So a little morally gray. And I wanted to do something a little better with it. So just so you understand, none of these are actual people. Each one of these faces is instead best thought of as a word in a language of faces. And you're only seeing a tiny portion of the whole dictionary of words. And with that language, not only can you describe any face, it turned out we could describe qualities about faces, like competence or insincerity. How do I know that we could do this? Well, like any good tech entrepreneur, this is my first company. We built this model to show off to people, and we built an incredibly sleazy game called Sexy Face. And people could show up at the website, and they would select faces, the faces they thought were sexy. And here was our promise to get people to show up. You play our game, and we guarantee you for free, we'll find everyone on Facebook that you think is sexy. And for $5, we'll find everyone who thinks you're sexy. Yes, so incredibly tawdry. Why would I use this incredibly powerful technology for such a sleazy purpose? Well, it's what we call a Trojan. The game was real. It genuinely works. But once you play it, it confesses. Actually, it's just a mind-reading game, the website would say. Select any face category. Okay, South Asian, mutton chops, and a sense of ennui. My apologies to the translator that has to deal with ennui. So it would learn it. It's amazing. We could just have people make judgments about faces that are competent. It could learn that. Again, it was a Trojan. The real purpose of this website was to train our model to understand how people made judgments about faces. Why? Because there are 1 million orphan refugees in refugee camps around the world. And 10 years ago, the way the United Nations dealt with that was they had a book that literally had 1 million photographs in it. And let's say you are living in Damascus and you haven't heard from your sister's family in Aleppo in months and you're fearing the worst, and you go to a refugee station in Jordan and they give you a book. And I hope you don't blink on day 3 when your niece happens to pass by on one of those pictures. Instead, we took this neural network and we made a little system for tablets and iPads where you could select sets of actual faces of kids, and within 3 minutes, if your niece is in any camp anywhere in the world, you found her. This was part of a program sponsored by Ericsson called Refugees United, and this is a testament to what artificial intelligence can do. I don't think I can think of anything worse than being 3 years old and abandoned in a refugee camp in a war zone. This is a demonstration of how artificial intelligence can make a fundamental change in those children's life by reconnecting them with extended family members. This young man was identified by a panel of world-renowned scientists to be the cutest little boy in the world. The fact that both of those scientists happen to be his parents are completely irrelevant. Scientists are always objective. But this young man is Felix. He's my son. And 5 years ago, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So I may be a neuroscientist, but at the time, if you'd asked me what's type 1 diabetes, how is it different than type 2, I wouldn't have been able to say much of anything. Turns out it's an autoimmune disease. His own immune system destroys the cells that make insulin. And without insulin, he would literally starve to death with a stomach full of food. So, of course, now around the world, we can treat type 1 diabetes, as we can type 2. But people die. They die early. They suffer blindness, loss of limbs. I didn't want that for my son. But you know what was more shocking than his diagnosis? It was a month later. We had collected everything about Felix. We crashed Google Docs. We created these giant spreadsheets. Every single food he ate recorded to the gram. Every activity level. We had basis bands and Fitbits. Eventually, we got what's called a continuous glucose monitor, a wireless device to estimate his glucose levels, a wireless insulin pump. My son is a cyborg. He is all wired up, and we collected thousands and thousands of data points, pages of spreadsheets of data, and we brought it in with us to see his doctor, thinking, oh, they are going to love us with our 3 inches of spreadsheet printout. And needless to say, they didn't. In fact, they were angry with us for wasting their time. So purely as an aside, if during the course of any of your jobs you might ever happen to say, what am I supposed to do with this data? That job is not long for this world. And medicine is one of those domains that is ripe for massive disruption. So in terms of this case, though, what I thought was, this is insane. I had all of this data, and instead they handed me a sheet of paper, a single sheet of paper, in which I hand wrote 15 numbers, 15 blood glucose readings. I had 15,000 numbers easy. They didn't want that. Instead, the doctor squinted at that sheet of paper, those 15 numbers, for 3 or 5 minutes, and said, all right, here's what we'll do for the next 6 months. And I immediately thought, you have got to be kidding me. I make models of the brain. Are you telling me diabetes is more complex than the brain? So I hacked all of my son's diabetes equipment. I have since learned that I broke several federal laws in doing this, which is fine, I guess, if you're the parent of the one who's getting hacked. I took the data that was being generated by his devices, and instead of sending it off to the companies that were doing nothing with it, I sent it to my own server. And I took some models that I had built of perceptual coding in the eye, and I repurposed them and built a model that actually predicts hours into the future whether his blood glucose levels were high or low. In fact, I had the pleasure of visiting the White House and meeting President Obama wearing Google Glass. So I used to wear Google Glass all the time. I wore it longer than anyone at Google did, believe me. And I took the first and only ever presidential portrait with Google Glass. And the reason I had a fluorescent blue computer at my face at a black tie event in the White House in Washington, D.C., is that I got real-time updates on my son's health, even though he was 3,000 kilometers away in San Francisco. I knew, I got a message. Felix's blood glucose will go low in a half an hour. Just level setting, the gold standard today is with the continuous glucose monitors, which is, this is where he keeps his, it's 20 minutes behind. We could detect an hour into the future. I didn't do this as part of a big company. I didn't leverage my lab at UC Berkeley. Just me, as a personal project, built a system that could do what no one else was doing. And in fact, one of the exciting outcomes of this is everything I'm talking about here today, or most of it, I just give away. So we just went and talked to the engineers at nonprofits, at big companies. One of the most exciting is Eli Lilly, where they are actually taking an advanced version of this algorithm as part of a deep neural network, and they're building it into what's called an artificial pancreas, essentially an automated insulin pump. And in simulation, it works better than a real biological pancreas. Now, that has some big implications, ethical implications. If you have a family history of diabetes, do you prophylactically get an AI-driven artificial pancreas installed? Do we allow people to compete in the Olympics if they have artificial organs installed that perform better than the real biological ones? And are they allowed if it's medically necessary, if it's not? Those are questions that I'm happy to tackle. Because when my son's having a hard day, when he has to go in for the 12th time and draw blood from his finger, I remind him that because he has diabetes, literally millions of people will be alive. And I hope that's a powerful motivator for him. It was certainly a powerful one for me to start on the project. Here's another one. This was a company that asked me to join their board and become their chief science advisor. They built a system that used a mobile phone. You didn't have to answer questions. You didn't have to do anything with your phone. It uses the sensor set, the gyroscope, the accelerometer, GPS, the ambient noise, ambient light, and in real time, it estimates your mood, your emotion. And they had plans for using this for market research. I am about to get on a JAL flight. How am I feeling before I get on the plane? How do I feel for the 9 hours it will take to fly to San Francisco? How do I feel afterwards? Amazing to have that market research in someone's real life in real time as they're experiencing it. I told them I would join their board and help them build this product if they gave me all of their data, because I wanted to predict manic episodes in bipolar sufferers. So if you're not familiar with bipolar disorder, it's a very common global disorder. In fact, it is the costliest mental health disorder in the world. It costs about $75 billion a year. The people that suffer from it go from experiencing these elated, creative highs to crushing depressions. And 25% of severe sufferers will go on to kill themselves. Numbers very similar to major depression. What if, doing nothing but carrying your phone around with you, we could detect a month ahead of time the onset of a manic episode or the onset of a suicidal episode? So this was an open question. I said, give me all of your data. I'll help you build the AI. You share your data with me. Turned out a young man at the company came to me in confidence and said, you know what? I have bipolar. You can use all of my data and know what's going on, and we'll go through it together. And in fact, we saw exactly that 3 to 4 weeks before he was aware that he was having a manic episode. 3 to 4 weeks before he was racing around the city, before he was in fear of getting fired, of getting divorced, of being institutionalized, we could see clear, demonstrable signals that he was heading towards that manic episode. By the way, in this particular disorder case, the most common treatments, for example, lithium, only work in about half of sufferers. And in fact, in the case of this young man, he would just lock himself in his bedroom and have his loved ones keep an eye on him for the week it took him to get through it, which was inevitably long after he'd already, in some sense, gone wild and run through the streets of Manhattan. What you're seeing here is a heat map, just one dimension of what our AI looked at, a heat map that showed the parts of Manhattan Island in New York City in which there were triggers for this young man that set off his bipolar. But the reality is it's a very complex system that integrates together huge amounts of data. But it turns out we could do this without ever asking anyone a question or listening in on their phone calls, without involving a doctor. We could see with high confidence, long before even his closest friends or family members could see, that he was heading to a manic episode, and we could intervene. What can be done with that on a global scale? That's an open question, because no one's ever been able to do this before. But imagine all of the young people here in Tokyo that will go to kill themselves this year, and the knowledge weeks ahead of time that you could give their loved ones to help avoid it. One last example of the work I've done in the AI space, this one in education. So this is a passion of mine. In fact, I have a couple of companies in the education space and also a nonprofit, and we're doing some amazing things. This is some older work, simply to demonstrate I think what's possible, which is what you're looking at here isn't a beautiful tropical bird. It's an online discussion. These are college-level biology students talking to each other about their class. Every one of those dots represents a student, and their location in space and their color represents information about the content that they're talking about. So what we actually had done was we built an AI, a little bot, that could listen to their online discussions, understand what they're talking about, model their cognitive model of their understanding of biology. We actually built a system that could actually do this with 5-year-olds based on microphones. And in this research project, we also had one for MBA students in economics. So what could you do with such a system? So we had 10,000 students enter these courses. Our system learned and listened. Then we saw the final score the student got in the course. And then 10,000 new students entered these two courses, undergraduate biology and MBA economics students. And we knew at week 1 what score they would get in the course. Without ever having looked at an exam, without ever asked an expert, without looking at the specifics of their work, simply by listening to them talk to each other. As the course progressed week by week, we knew with greater and greater accuracy these specific questions they would get wrong or right on the final exam. Now, my goal here isn't to build an automated grading system. It's not what I'm talking about today, but I strongly feel that the obsession with assessment actually is part of why human capital is a toxic asset. And until we break out of that, we won't change. Part of my goal in doing that here with this was, what if instead of giving high-stakes tests, we had an AI that could monitor students' learning in real time? An individual tutor watching a student learn in the classroom and at home. It knew and could advise their teachers and their parents on what to do. And in fact, we've gone on to build exactly such a system called Muse for parents that can actually make recommendations aligned with long-term outcomes for children. And by long-term, I mean we want to optimize how long your child will live, how far they go in their education, how much money and wealth they accumulate, their social connectedness, as well as their happiness. And it turns out we can facilitate those outcomes with AI. It doesn't magically do it on its own. It does it because we have chosen to focus on that task. We've identified what's actually important. So, 4 quick stories about work I've done with artificial intelligence. And I hope you see, on balance, these are overwhelmingly positive applications. Everyone involved is being helped by what we're doing. But also think hard in these stories. If you're a teacher, if you are a psychiatrist, if you are an endocrinologist, a doctor treating diabetes, If you are, remember where I got started, if you are a spy for the CIA, every one of these AIs might actually feel like a threat to your job. I like, as I said, to think of AI as augmented intelligence. How do we make better people? And every example I've given here is a domain in which we use the AI not to automatically change the world, but to intervene back through another human being and make them better. But there are reasons to be afraid. So one way to think about artificial intelligence is that it is any brief expert judgment, looking at someone's blood glucose levels, looking at their face and reading their facial expression. We built a system for the Muse project I talked about before, where you take a picture of your child's artwork and it analyzes it and uses it as part of our predictions of their life outcomes. There are a handful of experts around the world that can do that today. It's just a free component of a service that we can deliver anywhere in the world just via SMS. So, AI is any brief expert judgment, faster, cheaper, and in many cases, better than a human can do it. On our panel, I think we'll discuss what's called artificial general intelligence, true intelligence on par or exceeding our own. But if you want to understand AI today and the impact it will have on your companies, the impact it will have on jobs, this is what you need to understand. The spread of artificial intelligence in doing these very complex tasks better, faster, and cheaper than humans. Now, as I said, I have slides that could take up the next 5 hours of your life, and I have instead 5 minutes left. So we are going to go very quickly for these closing slides. And in fact, I'm going to go so quickly as to skip this one almost entirely, except to say it's a provocative title here. Technology is a sociopath. What does that mean? Technology doesn't understand us, and it doesn't care. It simply does what we tell it to. We make those decisions. Do we think that technology is a wonderful thing? Well, I can tell you, for example, that before my son was diagnosed with diabetes, I must have been searching on Google about bedwetting for 6 months. Turns out I know in retrospect that that is a phenomenally common symptom in young children of diabetes. It's the only way for them to get the extra sugar out of their body. I say with great confidence, Google could have told me that my son had diabetes. I know because I built these systems myself. They could have, but because they're afraid of getting involved in these complex ethical questions, they chose not to. Technology doesn't care about us. It is what we choose to do with it that matters. And it is worthwhile to think that people's lives have been lost because big companies decided they didn't want to deal with complex ethical questions. Here's another one that is very prominent in the world, social information. You want to know what song's popular? Look at the ones that has the most likes on Twitter. You want to know what videos you should watch? You want to know who you should hire? Go find who has the most followers on GitHub or in LinkedIn or Bitbucket. I'm too short on time to go into the details here, but I built a whole company around this as chief scientist at a company called Guild, where we predicted who you ought to hire at your jobs. And I will tell you 2 things that were not predictive whatsoever. Social signals online had no correlation whatsoever with our eventual job recommendations, and grades, standardized test scores. Both of those are very worth thinking about in a world when those 2 things have become 2 of the most dominant signals in how we make decisions about interacting with the rest of the world. Oh my gosh, there's so much I want to say, and I don't have the chance. So if you happen to come to our expert session letter, please ask some questions. Here's a provocative statement. Not just opportunity, but choice itself is fundamentally inequitably distributed. My father got a full scholarship to go to MIT in 1957, and he didn't take it. Why? In the words of my grandparents, what's the point of going to MIT if you're just going to end up back on the farm? He was a farm kid from the middle of Kansas, and if you don't know where that is, that's exactly the point. Our world is full of people that seem to make terrible choices on their own behalf. But in fact, when you analyze it, and I've done this work extensively using economic models, they in fact are making rational choices given their life experiences. At one of my companies, ShiftGig, which is an on-demand workforce company, we're tackling that directly by giving people's jobs, not though just to drive a car or to run a task, but to actually design an entire career trajectory to move them out of our employ and into a real full-time job. We want to take people and, in fact, change this fact. We don't want people to make bad choices in terms of their own life outcomes. And this is what I'm getting at. I want to make better people. We're almost out of time here. So I'll end with this, my real passion, coming back to it, neuroprosthetics, cyborgs. What you're seeing here, the tiny little thing is neural dust, one of many, many nanotechnologies being designed today, this one at UC Berkeley, being designed today to actually be able to read out in exquisite detail what is going on inside the human brain in real time in perfectly healthy individuals. And in fact, I have a couple of applied neuroscience companies, one of which called the Platypus Institute, in which we're using technologies like this to, in fact, optimize team performance from the most elite performers in professional sports all the way down to taking young children that are locked in and can't talk and giving them the chance to express themselves in classrooms with their peers simply with their thoughts. What can be done with artificial intelligence and technology is amazing. And every one of these has been done by one single person. I don't say that to be self-laudatory. I'm saying that hopefully to be inspirational. You don't need $1 billion budget. You don't need the power of Sony, but it helps, as my next speaker I'm sure will show you. You can make an incredible change in the world today with one person. But I will leave with this, a design challenge I put in front of everyone here that is making a management or an engineering decision about technology, which is the following. Technology must always challenge us. Right now, almost everything we build is made to make our lives easier, simpler. It's made to substitute for what we can already do, instead of to complement us and make us more. And when I say when you turn technology off, remember, I make neuroprosthetics. So my personal interest is in something called working memory. If I have a device in your brain that can improve your working memory, literally make you more intelligent, my goal for myself is that you're not just smarter when it's turned on, but when you turn it off, you are smarter than where you started. So thank you very much.